Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this FSR online debate on the regulatory regime of electricity interconnectors with third countries. My name is Ilaria Conti, and I'm the co-host of this event today, together with my colleague Alberto Potocznik, Deputy Director of the Florence School of Regulation, who is also the scientific organizer of this debate. And the Florence School of Regulation has been involved, has been researching on this topic recently. So we will have also the opportunity this time to hear directly what the work that has been going on this debate, on this topic, the work that has been done so far. And the very first presentation will indeed be given by Alberto for the opening session. As usual, we are going to have an online debate, which is today slightly longer than usual, but it will still be divided into two parts. So the very first part will, after the introduction by Alberto, we will hear about the policy perspective and also the regulatory perspective. And then in the second part of the debate, we'll have a panel debate with a number of external experts on the topic. As usual, I invite all the participants to contribute to the debate via asking questions. We have a Q&A box underneath our speaking heads. Please use it, and we will convey the messages for the speakers in the second part of today's debate. So I now give the floor to Alberto for the first introductory presentation.
Thank you very much, Ilaria, and good afternoon to all of you. As Ilaria mentioned, I'm going to present some initial results of our work looking at the regulatory regime for interconnectors with third countries. I will not go into the policy dimension. We have today also Florian Ermacora, he's head of unit in DG MENA, responsible for Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, and I will leave it to him to provide the bit of the policy perspective. I will focus on the regulatory issues, and I'm sure that Jan Koster, team leader, energy infrastructure at Acer, would then also have comments on what I'm going to present. So without further ado, let me try to share my slides. And to start my presentation, as Ilaria mentioned, this is still work in progress. We started to look into it, and I'm going to present some initial considerations regarding the regulatory framework for interconnectors with third countries. And we'll use also the opportunity of today's debate to further to progress with our work. So what I'm going to do is to look at three dimensions. The first one is the current regulatory framework governing the interconnection with third countries. Then I will try to offer possible regulatory models for these interconnectors, and then a couple of our relevant considerations. I will focus with interconnectors to North Africa. These are not the only third countries with which we might want to interconnect. In fact, we're already interconnected with a number of countries. There are interconnection with Great Britain. There are interconnection with Switzerland, with energy community contracting parties. But there is more history, and it's probably, while it's not, the regime is not yet fully settled. At least we have a background for these interconnectors. The energy community contracting parties are bound to adopt the same rules as the European Union. So I think we know a bit more we could have more visibility as the kind of arrangement that could govern these interconnectors. While with North Africa, there is very little of that. And in fact, the first part of my presentation is about the current regulatory framework. And my assumption or my conclusion, having looked into this, is that interconnected with third countries, and for sure those with North Africa, seems to be outside the scope of the electricity directive and the electricity regulation. because of the way in which interconnectors are defined in these acts. Sometimes it's clearer that these are interconnectors between European Union countries. Sometimes it's implicit, but I think we all know that when the definition in the gas directive have to be extended to the part of interconnected with third countries, the part of the gas pipeline connecting to third countries, which falls within or on the territory of member states or their territorial water, an amendment to that directive was required, and this was adopted in 2019. So the fact that a directive needs to be amended in order to include the part of the interconnected with third countries which insist on EU soils means that otherwise they would not be within the scope of European directives and regulations on the internal electricity and gas market. That's my first conclusion. The other conclusion relates to whether the 10-year regulation applies to these interconnectors. Clearly, the concept of projects of mutual interest has been developed to cover interconnectors between European countries, European Union member states, and third countries, even though the definition is not as clear, but clearly, that was the purpose. Then I looked also more closely to Articles 16 and 18, which are the articles that have to do with more closely with the regime, with the regulatory regime as we usually refer to, so access and tarification, etc. And here, I think I find a bit of confusion because Article 16, for example, mainly apply to project common interest, or at least it has been developed with project of common interest in mind, and only mutatis mutandis to project of mutual interest. There are, in fact, two paragraphs, one in each of Article 16 and Article 18, that just says, this article applies mutatis mutandis to PMI as well. What is Article 16? Article 16 is about the coverage of efficiently incurred investment cost, ultimately through network access tariffs paid by network users, the possibility to apply and having approved of the investment request, including a cross-border cost allocation, the requirement that national regulators take the cross-border cost allocation into account when fixing tariffs, and finally the possibility for TSOs to apply for regulatory to impose charges on access to these networks. So these are the typical provisions regarding the regulation of interconnectors. So this is why it's important to focus on Article 16 and 18. Article 16, as I said, was mostly developed for PCIs. It says that in the case of PCIs, the provision of this article and the features that I've just mentioned in my previous slides would not be applicable to exempted interconnectors. However, as I said, there is an explicit provision in this article regarding PMI, so I would have to assume and conclude that somehow this article also applies to PMI. So where are we now? We have a situation in which I think, and it would be interesting also to hear from colleagues what they think, whether they share the same interpretation. The provisions in the gas and electricity directives and regulation do not apply to interconnectors with third countries, so they fall outside the scope of these directives and regulation, while the 10-year regulation seems to apply to these interconnectors with third countries, even though there are some unclarity regarding how this application is actually affected. In any case, I think it would be useful with a number of projects being planned now, interconnecting especially North African countries to European Union, it would be useful to have a set of blueprint regulatory models which can provide the basis for the regulatory treatment of these interconnectors with third countries. And this is what we are trying to do with our project. I have to say that in the past, we worked with DG NEAR on a previous stage of this project, and now we are bringing it forward with a further step and further analysis of the situation. So, which models can be developed to look at these interconnectors with third countries from a regulatory perspective? I think we have, and using a terminology that we already used in the previous phase, we can have two types of approaches. One is what we call an interconnector model, and the other one is an integrated commercial project. As I said, this is something which we have now got used to refer to. The interconnector model is a cross-border transmission infrastructure which connects the electricity systems of the third country and of the European Union, and is developed independently on any renewable generation capacity in the third countries. Maybe what I did not specify is that all the interest, or most of the interest of developing these interconnectors is actually to import renewable electricity produced in the third country. And so in this case, in the interconnector model, this would not be part of the project. The other model is the integrated commercial project, where the cross-border transmission infrastructure connects one or more renewable-based generation capacity or plants in the third country with European electricity system. This generation capacity is not connected to the electricity system of the third country, even though one could actually also think of situations where some sort of connection is developed, even though the main purpose of these plants are to be connected to the European system through the interconnector infrastructure, to the transmission infrastructure. And the cross-border transmission infrastructure is actually developed jointly to the renewable-based electricity generation plant in the third country. So this is a combined project of capacity, electricity production capacity in the third country from renewables, and an interconnection with the European Union. Now there are two variants of the interconnector model. This is inspired by the analogous regime operating in Europe. One is the regulated regime, where the interconnector is subject to the usual conditions: unbundling, third-party access, and tariff revenue regulation. It depends, actually, the way in which, and I'll come to that in a moment, the way in which the regulation will apply to an regulated interconnector depends on the organization of the electricity sector in the third countries. I'll come to that in a moment. And clearly, it will have to be based on an agreement between the regulators in general, the authorities in the EU and in the third countries. And this kind of agreement would determine would determine the way in which this interconnector is used. The other one is this exempted or merchant regime, which is similar to the exemptions we have in interconnector between European Union member states. So is exempted from the usual unbundling, third-party access, and tariff and revenue requirement. And there may be conditions imposed on the interconnectors, the merchant interconnectors, and these will have to be agreed between the authorities of the member state in which the interconnectors is actually, to which the interconnector is connected, and the third countries, or the European Union would have, the European Commission could have a say on it. As I mentioned, the way in which the an interconnector model be developed and operated depends on the organization of the electricity sector in the third countries. And here I present a few possibilities depending on the degree of liberalization and competition in the third country. So we start from the very basic setting. Basically, the electricity sector in the third country is not liberalized. You have just one entity operating internally and for external trades. And then obviously the capacity of this interconnector will be on this third country side will be reserved for this entity. On the European Union side, well, then you could have two possible models. One is assigned to a nominated entity on the EU side as well, or it could be assigned also from our side to the nominated in the third country in order for such an entity to participate in the electricity market in the EU. The way in which the benefits are actually shared between the European Union and the third countries, in both cases, has mostly to do with an agreement between the authorities. In the first case is basically be agreed between the nominated entities. In the second case, most of the benefit would initially accrue to the nominated entity in the third countries because they will be able to participate in the European Union market, but then maybe it could be reallocated on the basis of a bilateral agreement. The situation becomes more interesting if there is some sort of liberalization in the third countries. And here we have three possibilities. The first one is liberalized, but there are no organized markets in operation in the third country. The other one is there is a local bidding zone of the European Union internal market. So the internal market extends to a bidding zone in the third country. And the last one, which I think in the case of North Africa is probably very, very far in the future, is that they join the market coupling of the European Union. Here again, I think in the first case, the capacity would be allocated explicitly because there is no market which could provide the opportunity of implicit allocation, while in the second and the third case, one can think of implicit allocation, either strictly speaking, explicit allocation or market coupling, as we know in Europe. And again, here the benefits would accrue in a very similar way as the one we use in Europe. The integrated commercial model is the other model that we are going to propose. It could be conceptually considered as a power park connected with a very long connection infrastructure. So clearly, as part of the integrated commercial model, the project, the transmission infrastructure or the connection infrastructure will be reserved for the use of the renewable-based generation and could be subject, at least in principles, to the provisions of the European Network Code on high voltage direct current connection. So it would be just like, or would be considered just like, power plant or a renewable power park connected to the European system, but very far away with a very long connection. Now, as I mentioned beforehand, there may be a hybrid model where this capacity is also connected to the local market in the third country, and this where the issue becomes more interesting and more complex, and this is the next stage in our project. I think we have some ideas, but as I said, we still need to develop them. In this case, the project promoters will face the risk and the benefits of the project not paying for itself or having a good return, depending on the relationship between the sales, the revenues from the sales of electricity in the European Union, the electricity produced by the renewable-based generation in the third countries, and the cost of this generation and of the interconnector. So as I said, this is where we got to, and now we're working on a hybrid model where the renewable-based generation capacity is linked mostly to the European Union electricity network, but also with some connection to the local network. Finally, to further aspects. First is the possibility of transitioning between models. As it is the case with interconnectors in Europe, the exemptions, for example, have a limited duration. And so one could also envisage that, especially if in the integrated commercial model, there is some sort of link to the local electricity network in the third countries, it may at some stage revert to the interconnector model, but clearly this needs to be looked more clearly into it. And the other aspect is what happens with the electricity that comes to Europe through either model. If the idea is to sell this renewable-based generation into Europe, it may be for off-takers which are not located in the bidding zone where the cable connects. And therefore, this electricity would have somehow to find either financially or physically its way to other bidding zones. At the moment, physical and financial products on cross-border capacity are only available 1 year ahead. The Commission is looking into the possibility of extending this, even though at the moment, the reference period for extension is 3 years. I think, if we want to promote these kind of interconnectors and the development of renewable-based capacity in third countries, with the possibility of selling this beyond the member state on which the interconnectors is connected, probably one would have to look further out in the future. But then obviously we know that TSOs are very cautious about providing guaranteed capacity beyond the immediate future. In any case, in this case, one would have to think of some sort of regulatory guarantee or regulatory coverage for this capacity or the financial value of this capacity beyond the near future. So it's all what I wanted to say. This, as I said, is a work in progress. And I would now like to turn to Florian for putting this presentation, which is admittedly a bit technical, into a general context of the connection with third countries. And also, if you have any initial remarks on this aspect. So Florian Ermacor, head of unit, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, DG MENA, thank you very much for joining us. The screen is yours, Florian.
Alberto, many thanks. Do you hear me? Do colleagues hear me? Okay, that's good. So I'm not talking into the blue. Many thanks for that presentation. Also, I'm not supposed to know anything about this because I'm the head of unit for the Director General MENA unit in charge, as you said, for the Maghreb, basically. And MENA is the Director General for the Middle East and Northern Africa. Although the discussion gives me sweet memories from negotiating at the time for DG ENA, the third country interconnector regulation on gas, and probably it's high time indeed to look on electricity. And actually that's what I want to sketch out. The sort of possible practical relevance of such interconnections. Actually, there are modelers who are saying that the EU is and will always be completely self-sufficient as regards electricity imports from abroad. That's a possible view, and that's an existing view. There is, though, a high probability that the EU can and will also benefit from third country electricity imports, maybe not for supply security, maybe just for prices, because as I will sketch out, there may be an interesting case as regards the potential in parts of our neighborhood regarding the production of electricity. In any case, the European Commission does not have any energy autarky strategy. This does not exist. For renewable hydrogen, the Commission even formulated import targets in the context of the Repower EU strategy. And a number of EU member states are quite explicit on their need to import not only hydrogen, but also electricity. So from that point of view, already today, we have quite some electricity interconnections with our neighborhood, UK evident, Norway evident, the East, the accession countries, including the Ukraine, also more and more interconnected, all under the regulatory roof of the energy community, and waiting for their accession to the European Union whenever this happens. I'm not sure whether I'm comprehensive there, exhaustive as regards the connections, but of course we also have a connection then to Turkey. And when it comes to the south, then for the moment there is a connection from Morocco to Spain. And I note just here in this context already that this connection helped Spain a lot to restart after the blackout a few weeks ago their electricity system, because in that time of extreme crisis in Spain, Morocco supplied up to 900 megawatts of electricity. So from that point of view, the usefulness of such interconnection also with the south is documented and is very, very clear. Overall, as we suspect since quite a time that it makes sense to increase the cooperation with Northern Africa on renewable energy, we are launching, as European Commission, a comprehensive strategy, which we are calling at this stage Trans-Mediterranean Renewable Energy and Clean Tech Initiative. We shorten it TMET. Sounds like T-Rex, but it's TMET, Trans-Mediterranean. Aiming indeed of working on this potential we see in our southern neighborhood when it comes to renewables. Actually, that potential is enormous. We have excellent conditions regarding sun and wind, as you can imagine. You have the space, non-comparable to Europe. And as a consequence, you have quite clearly lower costs to produce renewable electricity and hydrogen in our southern neighborhood. Lower costs than in the EU. In a recent study from IRENA, the International Renewable Agency, we saw figures of 25 to 40% lower production costs. And the capacity, given the space of these countries, the huge deserts, to produce renewable energy is close to infinite. So this is really a big thing. And some of you may remember Desertec more than 10 years ago. I remember Commissioner Oettinger very active there, helping big German companies to make a link, a big link between Northern Africa and European consumption centers for electricity. But this Trans-Mediterranean strategy I'm talking about, this TMET strategy, is not a Desertec 2.0. It is indeed about the exploitation and making of use the potential of renewable electricity, but it's not as such meant to be an export strategy. Working on the renewables in those countries is close to intuitive. For the moment, they are powered by fossil fuels, with some of the countries not having own fossil fuel themselves. So from that point of view, it's a question of national security to provide for own electricity. Obviously, decarbonization hugely important also in these countries. And overall, it's quite clear that all of these industries and households can benefit a lot from renewable energy. And the key thing we are doing here is looking into improving the investment conditions and triggering large-scale private investments in those countries. Now, as a matter of fact, due to the price differential, there is a lot of interest. This we view a lot of interest of connecting Northern Africa to Europe, both when it comes to electricity, but also hydrogen, but also derivatives of hydrogen, be it through cables, through pipelines, or just through ships. When we look at the electricity interconnection, I mentioned already the link from Morocco to Spain. The European Commission has assigned more than 300 million euro already into a project connecting Tunisia with southern Italy, ELMED, as it's called, which is a classical TSO to TSO project. A similar project we have seen or in the planning, and even as a project of mutual interest, so in principle qualifying also for European funding, is foreseen for a connection between Egypt and Greece. That project is called GREGI. Again, a classical public setup, TSO to TSO. But obviously, Alberto has not made his analysis into the blue when he also looked at models where you have production in those countries directly linked to the cable, which then goes to Europe. And we see a number of such project ideas, quite many, in fact, many gigawatt capacity. We are hearing here about projects linking Morocco to Portugal, further links Morocco to Spain. We are aware of a project from a company called X-Link connecting Morocco to the UK. Another long cable project is foreseen and worked on linking Morocco and Germany. We have also privately operated projects. I'm talking about projects really from Algeria and Tunisia to Italy and to Malta. So the analysis of Alberto is certainly not done in a vacuum, but in the context of very concrete needs. I should, by the way, to be complete, also add that recently a memorandum of understanding has been concluded between Libya and Italy for an electricity cable. So this is quite massive. This is relevant. When we talk about private investors going to such projects, then we have an interest also from the Director General for Middle East and Northern Africa, DG MENA, because we see in the usual setup of these projects that the investments in the partner countries will lead also to renewable electricity production for the domestic markets. And there's enough capacity. It's not either you have a project which gives electricity to Europe or to the domestic market. That's not at all the issue. It will hardly be possible during the next decades to exploit close to full the potential which is there. So we don't see any competition between the domestic supply, which is our key interest as DG MENA, and projects which lead to electricity supply, renewable electricity supply to Europe. And again, if we want to have investors, what we need is regulatory clarity. while we have achieved, I think, some regulatory clarity for the gas pipelines, I think it's high time to look at this from the electricity side. And from that point of view, Alberto and Ilaria, I think it's a very good idea that you're launching this debate here. This is of high political relevance, and it's of high economic relevance. So congratulations for having chosen this subject. I stay and I will listen with a lot of interest to this discussion, and I'm happy to intervene whenever that is wanted.
Thank you very much, Florian. Thank you for getting involved again in energy, even though, as you said at the beginning, it's not your focus any longer. But I remember the old times where we were both working together on this. Right, now, next one is someone who is looking at energy every day, every time. Jan Kostev, team leader, energy infrastructure at Acer. So, Jan, what do you make of what you've heard so far, my presentation, mostly because I guess you're more into the regulatory sphere?
Thanks, Alberto. Indeed, a very interesting dilemma. And I fully agree that it deserves more attention from regulators in general. As you can guess from my intro, I do not have a solution at the hand to provide right now, but maybe just provide some of the thoughts that's on what you presented, Alberto. Looking at the two options, so the what you presented as the interconnector model and the integrated commercial project model. On the interconnector side, I see two things which are probably quite relevant to understand, right? Maybe going a bit to the technical elements also, not just the regulatory ones, but if we would be venturing into an AC connection, that brings a lot of operational complications. I think despite what Florian said on the Morocco interconnector helping out the Spanish system in the recent situation, I think there are plenty of experience from the past. Perhaps Patricia from ENSOE can help out, as I see her there. I remember 15 or even more years ago when there were quite some operational issues when Turkey was connected. So in any case, this would add complexity. So most likely we are aiming to focus more on the HVDC side of things. Now, it still, of course, means that you have to respect some of the things there. The regulatory system would need to be, or the regulatory arrangements would need to be compatible across borders. This is one thing which would then require also some potentially some developments of the regulatory systems within Northern Africa, if we are focusing on that specific area, which perhaps in the integrated commercial project might not necessarily be the focal element, because those, to my understanding, would be sort of like fenced generation, which is just connected as an island to Europe. But going back to the interconnected model and on the regulated versus exempted, maybe also the point that, of course, granting an exemptions means that certain core conditions need to be met. One perhaps which is most important here is the risk element, that this investment is highly risky from the perspective of its costs and benefits and so on. So this is one thing which, I mean, maybe intuitively one can immediately say that such a project being perhaps treated almost like a pilot carries some risks with it, but we shouldn't forget about these core conditions, which are also quite demanding to meet. But maybe above all, if and why these core conditions are there and are important is that having an exemption is not always to the benefit of the consumer at the end, who's one way or the other paying for such investments through tariffs. Either through tariffs, sorry, or to the market price, if it's an exempted project. Usually, if you think about it, if it's a regulatory investment, if it's a regulated investment and the cost going to tariffs, that means also the return is regulated and capped at a certain limit, while of course exempted projects have a different environment, a different economic model, which also means a higher return for the one investing, meaning of course potentially the higher cost for the one paying for it. Last, maybe going to the second one on the integrated commercial model, my thoughts also go to the question of who would then operate, who would be the operator of that, who would be the owner and operator of that line, right? So would that be fully reliant on the rules of the operator that is connected on the European side? Would that operation be shared? And those sort of things, I feel, offer some interesting areas to deep dive into also. And I would, for now, stop at that. I'm quite curious what also the polls would bring, and maybe we can discuss further on when we have some results of that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jan. I think you raised a number of very interesting and intriguing points, and also food for thoughts for further work on in our project. So thanks a lot. Thank you to Florian. Thanks to Jan. And now I will return the screen to Ilaria to present the panelists and moderate the panel discussion. Ilaria.
Sure. Thank you very much, Alberto, for giving the floor. And thanks, I heard many interesting input already in the opening session. So we are now opening the panel debate with, as I said in the introduction, we are very happy to welcome a very distinguished set of speakers, and we will start immediately with the first one, Alessandra Pasini, who is president and CEO of Zero, and she's also one of the co-founders. So we will hear from Alessandra about this project and its mission to bring clean and also affordable energy. Then we will have Peter Kleis, president of IFIEC, so representing the consumers. Patricia Labra, chair-elect, System Development Committee of ENTSO-E, the European Network for Transmission System Operators for Electricity. And last but not least, as always, Francesco Cariello, head of European regulation at the Italian regulator ARERA. So as you can already intuitively understand, several different perspectives, and we look forward to hearing from you. We will have a first round of introductory remarks. So I ask each panelist to stay possibly within 5-6 minutes for the first round. Alessandra, you have the floor. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Ilaria, and good afternoon to everybody. I think both Florian and Alberto did introduce some of the key points, which underpins the reason why we at Zero are developing this project called MedLink, which is developing both dedicated greenfield renewable generation and HVDC cable to bring such generation from Tunisia and Algeria into the northern part of Italy, landing in a place where the grid is strong enough to fully dispatch that power. I think, as you said, Alberto, the overall scheme and how also Florian mentioned this, the overall starting point is that probably some of the regulation that are in place today were not designed to think about importing from outside of Europe as a start. And so we clearly start from a context that was not thought in that environment, which is a clear first distinction versus the gas market, which I'm very familiar with, which instead was actually designed to on one side and try to stimulate competition and therefore all of the unbundling requirements, but at the same time needed to address the needs for facilitating liquid market, because that's also how you can drive down cost. And so I think there are some big distinction between these two markets, which I want to put the attention on just talking about the interconnector. First of all, if we talk about North Africa, we talk about a place and a region where resources can be very competitive, but also where markets are not as developed and liquid as the rest of Europe is. So that's the first point, and one that needs to be thought through with both an energy hat, but also with a MENA development hat. And so you clearly need to stimulate the development. And what some of this project aim at doing this is actually, on one side, leave generation for the local consumption, which is what we are doing with our Medlink, but at the same time create some backbone infrastructure that could, over time, stimulate further development of renewables in the region. And on one side, it has the natural benefit because it's very cheap and cost competitive to free up more gas, which is strategically valuable for Europe, leveraging existing pipeline infrastructure. So from an ecosystem standpoint, this from a macro standpoint makes sense. Now, clearly, if we then look into the business model and the interconnector versus the island mode, if I can just simplify with the two options, then the complexity comes in the mix, because the integrated read-through of what is the TENI regulation on one side, what are the parameters required for PMI, are very different from what is envisaged within the EU, and for a good reason, because there is liquidity within EU. There are a number of TSOs, and so it's a much easier and more flexible environment versus what we are trying to address here, which is connecting a known member state, or in my case, two known member state with a member state. And we have, if we want to be realistic, we need to do, and we're talking about private project here, not regulated, nothing goes into the RAB and nothing goes into the customer bills. We need to be very clear that we need to have as our polar star what is required to be a bankable project, because that's what drives private capital to be invested into something. And that's clearly, on one side, is there a demand that can be contracted on a long-term basis, i.e. are there off-takers? And if the answer is yes, which means that the price is interesting, then what are the limitations for this? And the limitations are what you were referring to, Alberto, in terms of the regulation in Europe not envisaging long-term booking differently from the gas market. It doesn't mean that this is a killer, because you can just take some financial risk and renew such international capacity booking on an annual basis, which is what is our assumption, but clearly it doesn't fully help the bankability. The second thing is that, as we are talking about green affordable energy, we clearly need to be able and safe in certifying such energy. And the more we force the full integration with the local grid, the more we create some technical issues, but also the more we make the complexity of the certification high. And so one of the things that I encourage to think through is, as always, if we talk about new business model and new needs, which is increased connectivity with Northern Africa, the way probably to address this with a gradual approach. And so rather than I take the hydrogen as an example, because in my prior life, I spent a lot of time on hydrogen, and how the third gas directive has addressed the hydrogen needs has actually been done by thinking as if we were talking about an existing liquid market, which is clearly not the case, which is part of the issues and the challenges that the industry now has. I think in thinking about how can we facilitate and encourage private investment, because I think this is a win-win. There is, energy prices are high, infrastructure charges are already high because there is a lot of investments in the grid that needs to be made by TSO anyway. So try to promote private investment that allow business model that can coexist, at least in a gradual shift towards a more liquid and interconnected market, I think is what is required for a project like ours to have an easier path from a regulated framework standpoint, rather than one where, rather than have simplification on what is already a higher risk, because we talk about investment in North Africa, and more complexity on the regulatory side, in addition to what is, as I just said, the higher regulatory risk.
Wow, thank you so much, Alessandra. Very interesting insights, very also concrete view. So thank you so much. We'll move now to Peter, whom I don't see. Peter Kleis, please.
Thank you
Yes, I
very
see you now.
much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, very well, Peter.
Great. Thank you. Congratulations, Alberto, for making the complex situation of electricity market organization in Europe even a bit more complicated. But of course, we're very happy with this analysis, and a priori, I would say industrial consumers are always interested in buying cheaper electricity. So if we can import it from third countries, we will of course be happy. I haven't really given this much thought yet, and there's so much aspects once you start thinking about it that come up and that complicate things even further. The first is why renewables only? I only hear you talk about connecting renewables with North Africa or other parts of the world. Renewables will have the disadvantage that your load factor will be lower and that your interconnector will only be used when there's wind or in the sun. You can better use that infrastructure by allowing, for instance, nuclear or other sources of electricity to pass over the interconnector when there's no wind or no sun. So that's something that we should think about. Would also better contribute to security of supply if you have a base load use of that or availability of that interconnector rather than only when there's wind and sun. So that's one thing. Not only renewables, but use it as a baseload interconnector. Another reflection is on the pricing, and specifically, if you want to import from a non-liberalized country, you will have to convince your investor on the other side of the border to invest and to send the electricity you generate to Europe at a market price or a market-based price, while he might have a regulated, guaranteed price in the country where he is producing. So we will have to think about that. How are we going to integrate the electricity that comes out of the interconnector inside EU? How are we going to integrate that into the electricity market? Will it be based on marginal pricing? Will it have to participate in existing market mechanisms, or can there be PPAs for that at fixed prices, etc., etc.? So that's another aspect that definitely has to be looked into. Same thing for long-term contracts. So you know that industry has always been very much interested in long-term contracts, also for cross-border activity inside the EU. If it is possible for this kind of interconnectors with third countries, maybe we should consider the possibility also for existing situations and existing borders within the European Union. I'm not saying it's not possible today, but it's not obvious to get long-term contracts for cross-border capacity. Two more. One, what about CBAM? Will CBAM be applicable to the electricity imported from the countries in question? Will we tax these imports of renewable energy or complete it with other sources if you follow my suggestion, if the country in question does not have a climate policy which is comparable to the one of the EU? So I think it's a very interesting question. The discussion is ongoing on how to apply CBAM on electricity imports. Well, this is of course a very distinguished occasion to look into it further. And then a last reflection that I made while listening to you, Alberto, why don't we apply the same kind of logic to offshore connections, where we could also consider them a point-to-point connection between, specifically when we go further offshore and farther away from the existing electricity grids. You could also look into possibilities for applying the same kind of logic to the connection of far off offshore parks. That's just a few reflections I have at this stage, and happy to discuss it further.
Thank you, Peter. Very important to always, not only thinking about infrastructure, but also the market rules which will apply once the connection is on. And by the way, you also raised a point which somehow had already emerged in the chat. One of the participants asked why, regarding the integrated model, why require some connection to the local grid if the local country is not requiring it? Local connection will make green certificates difficult, if not impossible. So with reference to what you also said. And we will probably bring this forward later on during the debate. But now let me please give the floor to our third panelist, Patricia Labra. Please, Patricia, feel free.
Thank you very much, Ilaria. Thank you very much for the opportunity to exchange our views on this topic from a TSO perspective. Well, a relevant reminder, I think, is that the development of the network, and that includes interconnections with our countries, remains to a great extent to a competence and responsibility of the member states. So it's up to member states and third countries, of course, to cooperate in that international field in order to implement these type of projects. And there, project promoters play a crucial role in this respect, and also TSOs, as they can provide the technical expertise necessary to develop and implement these projects. We know, however, that the development of network and interconnections in general faces several challenges, such as permitting and financing. And there is the point when the European legal framework comes into play to help overcome these challenges by enabling the development of interconnections. And as already has been said, the European legal tool to address the interconnections between Europe and third countries is this concept of the project of mutual interest, the PMIs, under the 10 regulation. But how to become a PMI? Yeah, that it involves several actors that operate in different levels. And one of the first is the elaboration of the TYNDP by ENSOE, the 10-year network development plan. Then is the elaboration of the regional list by the regional groups, and then the elaboration of the union list by the European Commission and approved by the member states. Well, regarding the TYNDP and the role of ENSOE, here ENSOE is the responsible for elaborating the TYNDP, as I mentioned, and plays a supporting role in the determination of the PCIs and PMIs. And here, for each TYNDP cycle, ENSOE develops possible scenarios regarding the future development of the grid and identifies needs and gaps in the network infrastructure. It includes Europe and also other countries around Europe. That's in order to fulfill the European objectives. Then we also publish a guidance inviting project promoters to submit projects to be included in the TYNDP based on the last available system needs and system gaps exercise. And after assessing the applications according to the guidelines, ENSOE assess the cost and benefits of the submitted projects based on a cost-benefit assessment methodology that is approved by the European Commission, which gives possibility to be objective, neutral, and robust on the assessment. There are some aspects affecting interconnections with our countries that probably require evolution, like the CBAN consideration that Peter also has introduced, but it's a sound methodology. In these guidelines for project inclusion that, of course, must be current with the European regulation, there is a list of administrative criteria for the project promoters, such as unbundling, unless they have an exemption or proof intention to ask for it. Other administrative criteria are proofs of company existence, financial strength, which has assets higher than 1 million euro, or technical expertise of doing such a project. And then we also need to prove credibility of the projects, which can go from being planned in an official national development plan, or having a valid application for exemption, or having member state support, to having asked also the less perhaps the less aspect is to at least have asked a feasibility study to the system operations with all the required information and according to proper process and timelines. If we go to the next slide, we can see some results of the TYNDP 2024 with the project portfolio. And today we are talking about mainly with third countries about in North Africa. So you can see there that there are several projects there. The TYNDP 2024 has 7 projects, I think, something like that, with third countries. Third countries in North Africa, they have different status and also different nature. Also, it's not completely clear to what extent they are connected to the electrical system of the third country that Alberto was introducing there. There are that difference between the interconnectors and integrated commercial projects. In the future, these aspects should be more clear and proved by the project promoters. We have there under construction projects such as ELMET, as was already mentioned. By extension, also to the eastern part, also we have the Great Sea projects that it's between Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, that it's also under construction. And in the figure on the right, we have several projects under consideration. Most of them have been already mentioned. We have there the Gregi project between Greece and Egypt. We have the GAP project between Greece, Crete, and Egypt. Also, the Medlink project that has been already mentioned between Italy, Algeria, and Tunisia. We have Tunur also between Malta and Tunisia, and we have also the X-Links project that has been already mentioned between Morocco and Germany. All these projects are HVDC projects, which makes a difference with existing links in Turkey and Morocco. As Flora mentioned, those are conventional AC projects. Technically, they have different implications, as Jan mentioned. AC and DC can have different complexities for sure. One aspect with HVDC is the cost and the scarcity and supply chain issues, which means that the benefits must be clear for those projects, for the whole system. Yeah. So this cost-benefit assessment is performed here in a transparent way, and is what is used later by the European institutions, which are responsible for determining the PMIs. And getting that PMI level allows those projects to have some benefits related to permitting, to financing, and in general political support. So, well, to conclude, that's interconnections between Europe and third countries are increasing. So clarity on the regime to apply is relevant. Also, to what extent Europe wants to rely on imports, and under the TYNDP and the CBA assessment that is performed plays a crucial role in determining the benefits of these projects in an objective manner. Thanks.
Many thanks to you, Patricia, for this very complete overview, very, very useful. Let's move now to Francesco for the final round of intervention, please.
Thank you, Ilaria. And thank you also for the opportunity to participate in this interesting panel. Let's say that our experience at the Italian regulator is quite long, I would say, in developing interconnection with third countries. And we also explored the several possible arrangements, in the sense that we have developed in the past exempted interconnector with Switzerland, which is, of course, a bit peculiar, but it's still a third country. With Montenegro, we also have a partly exempted interconnector, which is currently in operation. So part of the capacity is managed according to our rules. So we have a usual explicit auction for accessing the capacity, while part of the interconnector has been funded by privates, and so it's been granted as a third-party exemption. So we, let's say, already experienced, and we moved, I would say, in this gray area that Alberto has described at the beginning, where the application of the EU acquis is not entirely clear. And so we somehow tried our best to move, as sometimes Italians are good at doing, in this gray area, and developing, let's say, what we find, let's say, good compromise solutions to put together all the needs. There is now this ELMED initiative ongoing, which will be instead of possibly a fully private TSO investment. And we have also have, of course, the proposed initiatives by private market actors. Let's say from the regulator's perspective, of course, the integrated model has a good merit, because you avoid putting the risk of these initiatives, the huge risk of these initiatives, on the shoulders of your taxpayers. And so, of course, we see with great interest in favor, I would say, the initiatives that are carried out by private actors intending to cover the entire cost and the risk of these interconnections. Nevertheless, I would say that we have also an experience of initiatives that have been carried out at the beginning as exempted infrastructures, and then later in the development of the initiative, they somehow gave up the exemption and pretended to be covered by the regulatory framework. And so we had a huge litigation in front of the court, and at the end of the day, we were forced to integrate into the regular regulatory regime this infrastructure. And so this was, let's say, a key lesson learned for us as regulator, in the sense that you should never underestimate the risk, even if an initiative is carried out and promoted by private market participants. Still, you shouldn't underestimate that at a certain point in time there is a risk to be covered by your tariff. So this is somehow our attitude nowadays, given this background experience. For developing and talking about Northern Africa, of course, the level of the competition in the source market is key, in the sense that all the parameters by which you usually estimate the business case of an interconnection, a TSO-TSO interconnection, I would say, are no longer fit with an interconnection of this kind. So you cannot rely, for instance, on the generation cost of electricity in the source market, if in the source market there is only one monopolist, for instance, because of course, as I think Peter said in advance, there is no incentive for the market, for these monopolists to bid and to buy your capacity at any price, because he is the only player who can use and benefit for this interconnection. And so in this case, I believe that it could be one of the cases in which the electricity framework mimics what has been developed in the gas sector. In the past, we had more and more requests to, let's say, copy in the gas regulation the experience of the electricity one. And while in this case, I think that arrangements like the open seasons could be promoted in order to hedge at least part of the investment risks, in the sense that one should try to allocate in long term the capacity, the intended capacity to be built on the basis of a tariff designed by the regulator, in order to see whether there is the interest of existing and potential new market participants to get part of the capacity on the basis of, for instance, investment in generation that they intend to do in the source market. And in this case, you manage to link the final investment decision to a certain level of capacity already allocated in the long term that would definitely be a tool to hedge part of the risk that this kind of investments entail. And so I think in our legislation, even if it was never applied, there is a provision that prescribes this type of mechanisms for initiatives with third countries, and that would be the case for, let's say, public funded investments in this area. I think would be an ideal mechanism to be explored. I agree with what has been said about the long-term transmission rights issue. So that currently in Europe we don't have tools that allow for, I don't know, a PPA to be subscribed across borders. So it's definitely an area we should investigate. It could also support the type of initiative as the one promoted between Tunisia, Algeria, Italy, towards other foreign European markets. Let's say without this tool, there is always a part of the business case which is not hedged. For CBAM, also there, I take Peter's suggestion at the beginning. With Montenegro, I think we're going to explore the application of CBAM very soon, in the sense that we expect that from 1st of January 2026, we will apply the charge to all the imported volumes. While this is possible, at least in technical perspective, for an explicit allocated capacity, which is explicitly nominated, so you know how much of the capacity is actually imported through that specific border, it's going to be a bit more problematic in case of implicit allocation, so in case of market coupling. We are currently working hard with Montenegro in order to integrate them as soon as possible in the European coupling under the Energy Community transposed rules. This will be possible. Still, it's not clear under this arrangement how the CBAM could possibly be applied. That's it. I think will be interesting to see the
Thank you, Francesco. It's been really interesting. I think each of the panelists added, probably, if possible, more complexity, but also some very interesting points of reflection and ideas. So I have to refrain from asking questions because we are running a little bit late. And I immediately give the floor to Alberto because we have prepared some polls, and I know that some speakers have some time constraints. So please, Alberto.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ilaria. Yes, we are a bit running late, but it is worth the time. That all contributions were extremely good. So we prepared, as always, a number of polls for the audience so that they can also express their views. The first one is about the benefits. So in your views, what could be the main benefits of interconnectors with third countries, in particular with North Africa? Different possibilities to diversify Europe's energy sources, to access greater renewable-based generation capacity that can be developed in Europe, to reduce the cost of electricity in Europe, or to support the economic development of these third countries. You can also have no views, and unfortunately, you will only be able to choose one of them. So, which is the most relevant benefit that you see within the connection with third countries? And speakers and panelists cannot vote, but they will have an opportunity later on to comment on the results. Well, that's interesting because it's quite a diversified feedback. Slight majority diversified Europe and reduce the cost of energy, diversified Europe energy sources. I'm looking forward to our panelists and speakers to comment on these different views. So let's go to the second question is In your views, would the benefit emerging for interconnectors with third countries depend on the stage of development liberalization of the electricity sectors in these countries? Be careful the way in which the question, and I notice, is being phrased. Yes, it will depend on the level of liberalization, because a non-liberalized sector in the third country would be able only to provide marginal benefits, or no, if you think that most benefit would accrue anyway, independently of the level of liberalization, you can also have no views. So the first one is if you think that it matters, the level of liberalization. The second one, if you think that most of the benefit would accrue anyway, even if the third country has not liberalized the sector. Well, again, quite split audience. That's interesting. Excellent. I think it's very interesting feedback. Thank you very much. And then the third one, in your views, should the EU have a preference between the interconnector model and the integrated commercial model, as described in my opening presentation, in developing its ability to import electricity from third countries, renewable or not? The first option is yes, the EU should favor the regulated interconnector model, as it provides wider access to the electricity sources of third countries. The EU should favor the exempted interconnector model as to shield consumers from the risk of the project becoming financially unviable. Or the EU should favor the integrated commercial model to ensure that renewable-based generation capacity in the third country will be also developed. Or should it be neutral? Should the EU be neutral? Also, you can have no views. And I think in all previous cases, there were no one or very few of the attendees having no views. Okay, so it seems that we are going for a neutral. There is a slight majority that think that the EU should be neutral with respect to the different models, and if not, the integrated commercial model seems to be the favored among the other alternatives. So thank you very much, and I will now, I will get back to Ilaria to manage a short round of intervention from the panelists and speakers.
Yes, I look forward to the comments. The results were really diversified, really split preferences. So unless there's a volunteer, I would just go in reverse order and starting from Francesco for a quick comment to the results.
Yes, thanks. I found a bit surprising the answer to the liberalization level in the source market, which instead I considered as extremely important. In particular, so maybe it depends on the type of interconnection we are thinking about. So in the case of a public funded TSO investment, I believe that is definitely a crucial aspect. So it's another, in order to exploit the benefits, you need some sort of competition level on the other side of the border, unless you manage to perform, let's say, the type of open season arrangements I've been talking about. But it's something very different from the, let's say, usual framework under which interconnectors have been developed in across, let's say, biddings on borders in the competitive European market. For the rest, I think it's yes, it's very interesting to see how split the audience has been. I would have been more convinced about other options, in particular, for instance, the integrated model, as I said, is in particular in this type of environment is definitely something I would support more than others, as I consider it to be less risky for our pockets.
It could be also because there were some very smart people in the chat raising doubts also on this model. So this might have biased a bit of the answers. But thank you very much, Francesco. Patricia, what has particularly astonished you from the poll's results?
Well, in the first question, well, I guess that the tricky point was being able only to choose one of the options. But I guess that there was pretty much consensus on diversifying, reduced cost of electricity in Europe. But I also think that a collateral effect would be to support the economic development of these third countries. It will also help to develop also that renewable-based system for them, because we also have to take into account that those countries also will increase their demand in the future years. Probably they don't have clear obviously for all of them related to decarbonisation and to electrification, but they will increase that for sure. And probably most of that learning will also help them to develop. Yeah, I think that's interesting. In the last one that was related to the model itself, the result was neutral. I'm not surprised about that. It's normal. I would also mention that for those that are integrated commercial projects, they could be there is an option that they would be also generation antennas that the only thing that changes is that they are located in a different country. So perhaps that's it's something to take into account, how to consider those. And regarding the second one, well, it was 50-50 the result. I wouldn't add anything to that, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patricia. Peter, your comments.
Whoa. No, I wasn't really surprised by seeing the results, but my intuitive reflection was to say, well, most people have not really thought this through and are shooting from the hip and giving here an intuitive answer. On the advantages, it's clear that diversifying energy sources is the first thing you think about, specifically in times where security of supply is a main concern. Maybe the reference to gas also, and say, well, the more we can import from somewhere else, the better. But it's not. Well, there's no other motivation given on why people choose this answer. The third one, that's the easiest thing to say. Well, the Commission should be indifferent, and I don't know. So let the Commission decide for itself. There also, I think we really have to thoroughly think through these models, and I'm not seeing two models. I'm seeing different submodels with each their advantages and probably also disadvantages. So there really needs to be more work done on this issue before really we can take a position. But yeah, it was a bit a split reply to the different questions.
Well, they were very difficult questions, and indeed, not so easy considering also the variety of the different jurisdictions we think about, right? So, thank you so much, Peter. Alessandra, I think unfortunately has had to disconnect, so I don't know if Andrea, her colleague, would like to come in.
Yes.
Andrea, hi.
Thank you, Ilaria. Yeah, we'll be stepping in for Alessandra. So I would say, as the other panelists already mentioned, I think we quite welcome the answer, actually. So on the first one, we clearly see like diversifying sources and reducing cost across Europe. I think they were the top two answers, and we can clearly see that how this project can diversify energy with, for example, uncorrelated wind and solar in Europe. It's very important. And it was mentioned before as well, with lower cost of generation, that can be very beneficial, as Peter mentioned, for industrial customers across Europe. On the last question regarding the EU approach, indeed, we welcome the fact that most of the participants think that there should not be a preference and the EU should be neutral. Indeed, we believe that should be the case. Like TSO are really quite busy, and they have quite a pipeline of projects to reinforce the national grids. So allowing also private operators to develop merchant lines will open up the opportunity to really strengthen, reinforce the European grid. And so integrated project like Medlink can really bring benefits there, making sure that third country also develop renewable sources, while at the same time making sure that the projects are bankable without necessarily having to wait on consumer bills and ending up on regulated tariffs. So we also welcome that many people here thought that it would be a good approach, basically.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea, for stepping in for Alessandra. I have to really thank all the panelists because their comments were extremely interesting, and I'm sure Alberto will collect and make good use of it also for the continuation of the study. Unfortunately, we had invited also other speakers from the other projects that Florian mentioned in his intervention, such as Elmed and Greggy, but they could not join. But hopefully we'll manage to hear also their views on this topic on another occasion. I was wondering, perhaps Florian and also Jan would like to to comment on what they heard so far. And Florian, if I may add, I don't know if you would like to answer also this question which appeared in the chat. It's about the fact that since the electricity directive is not applicable to interconnection with third countries, whether the possibility of European TSOs to own and operate interconnection outside of the EU would be actually a violation of unbundling rules. Of course, we are now trying to make good use of your energy expertise, but I really leave it up to you. You're not, if you want to answer this. It's a little bit slightly out of the off topic today. Florian, please.
Thanks, Ilaria. And I would want to say one or the other thing in reaction to your questions. Indeed, and as regards your last question, if I remember well from my third package negotiation times, and this is a long time ago, I think it didn't make a difference according to the electricity directive and the gas directive, whether the assets are within the EU or outside the EU when it comes to unbundling. So I don't know whether this was a legal question or a policy question. If it was a legal question, that would be my take on it. And if it was a policy question, I have the impression from what I see from concrete projects, there are enough companies interested to invest in these third countries, so we don't necessarily need to let the TSOs who have so much work within the EU start focusing on such projects. As regards your first question, what are the benefits? I think all of the points you made are relevant. It's very difficult there to say one is more important than the other. But apart from no views, all I think is very, very relevant and a good summary, in fact, of what the benefits are. With regard to the question of the liberalization of our partner countries and their energy systems, and this is not directly related to the question, but linked to the question, I would just warn against the thought that we should start interacting with these countries also in terms of import-export and wait till the moment they are liberalized in European measures. Forget about it. Forget about the idea that anytime soon any of these countries will have a third internal market package standards, anything like this. Let's not forget this has lasted. I think we started in '96 or so with the first liberalization. We are still not there, you could say, for some of the countries, and the problems, the vested interest, the political role of integrated companies in these countries maybe even more difficult than in many of the European countries. So let's please not build on the idea that first these countries need to implement the third package and then we start cooperation, because then that would mean we would never cooperate. And as regards the models, interconnector model and so on, I think also there we should be modest. Let's not assume too much from in terms of organization and also TSO work in the third countries. I have seen many of the TSOs in these countries being large integrated companies. To be honest, not necessarily ready for reform, often very much linked to the political class. So from that point of view, I think we need to be pragmatic in our cooperation with these countries and help them, of course, making benefit from the huge potential they have, but not necessarily wait till they are all reformed in shape and so on and so forth. And that's also my impression from the discussions with those partner countries, that often they are in favor of these integrated projects which separate production from the general system for reasons of their vested interests, and they like private companies coming in and taking things from scratch. And just one comment on what Peter said as regards base load. Yes, by all means, I have the impression that the project promoters are looking for means to exploit the capacity to have a high capacity load for the interconnectors, and I think it's quite indispensable that you have wind combined with sun combined with batteries. That's for me quite clear. So at the end of the day, from what I see from the discussions with the project promoters, their business case is often arriving with baseload, renewable baseload in Europe. They're not building just on photovoltaic and then come at the peak time, maybe even at the same peak time as you have the photovoltaic peak in Europe. But on the other hand, I would not go for nuclear or anything like this. There are no plans apart from Egypt maybe to go for nuclear with many difficulties. But I think you can have renewable baseload, but baseload is already commercially quite important. Thanks.
Thanks to you, Florian. Thanks a lot. So let's move to Jan and then to Alberto for the conclusions. Jan, please.
Thanks, Ilaria. I'll try to be quick in my reflection. The first question is a bit of a sort of tricky one, right? Because it at least leads us, and initially it's also led me to think from my own personal perspective. But if we look at the economics of doing such projects, and if you have a private investor, a European one that would want to do something like that, I probably a couple of these points are not that interesting for them, right? They are looking at things from more a cost-benefit perspective, which to me means that most likely the third bullet point of reducing the cost, if you look at the cost differential and the fact that you would be selling energy, cheaper energy to Europe and selling it at a higher price, would be the biggest driver perhaps for the investment itself, right? It's not about whether Europe feels more favorable towards environmental benefits or not, but in the case of business, it's about getting remunerated for what you do. But this is just, again, more business perspective than personal one would be, I agree with what was said before, that all of these benefits seem very important from different angles, of course. On the second one, I feel like, again, from a commercial benefit point of view, I think option B is maybe, to me at least, I don't see why a liberalized versus non-liberalized would make too much of a difference in that respect. So again, if you treat it from this very commercial angle, I might be leaning more towards the second option. And the third one is also a bit tricky, the third question, because, well, I think in essence, EU most likely should be neutral. But there are certain caveats here, of course, and there are certain conditions to allow this neutrality. It cannot just be, whatever you do under these different options or models, the EU should simply remain silent and do nothing. So the conditions are there to be met. And I think for some of them, these conditions are much more difficult to meet than for some others. I think here the balance is more in this difficulty, right? So how will the one investing be able to meet the conditions for example, regulated interconnected model, or exempted, or this integrated commercial project? And these are completely different, with different pluses and minuses, of course, accompanying them. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jan. Alberto, I think you have lots of material.
Plenty.
Please.
No, plenty. It was extremely interesting, I have to say. Extremely rich debate. Interesting feedback from the audience. There is one question in the Q&A, whether we should be looking at similar models for North Seas and the relationship with the UK. I think that's a chapter in its own. But for our main focus, which is interconnectors with North Africa to import renewable electricity first and then whatever. I think this was an extremely, as I said, rich debate. Thanks a lot to everybody for a lot of food for thoughts for moving forward with our project. We never thought that we cracked all the issues, but others beyond what we had already in mind came up. So thanks a lot. I wouldn't try to conclude because this is still work to be done. But as I said, I have plenty of notes on new issues to be considered. So on my side, before giving back to you, Ilaria, for closing it, I would like to thanks a lot Florian, Jan, Alessandra, Peter, Patrizia, Francesco, and Tomiris on the background, without whom nothing would have happened today. So thanks a lot to everybody for participating, the audience for providing their very intriguing feedback on the questions, and Ilaria.
Yes, indeed. I think I was about to say also, we will also collect the questions in the chat because they were also very stimulating, and I think they deserve at least some options, if not final answers. So really thanks to everybody for the great participation. Thanks, Alberto, for proposing this very, very interesting topic and for involving me. Look forward to the next steps. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.